Hey, everybody, welcome to A Mighty Blaze. I am Jenna Blum, one of the co-founders of The Blaze, and I am here today with a very special Friday Frontliner guest, Curtis Sittenfeld. Welcome, Curtis. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Good. I have been stalking you for years mercilessly on all the social media platforms, as well as reading all of your books. So for me, this is an especially exciting thing to have you as a captive audience today.
Hi.
Hi. Thank
Hi.
you. For those of you who are repeat Blaze offenders, welcome back. Thank you for bringing your light to the Blaze. For those of you who are new to the Blaze, we are a team of 35 creative professional volunteers dedicated to helping writers reach their readers. Originally in the age of COVID, but now COVID is like officially over. And here we still are bringing your favorite authors to you in your living rooms. You don't even have to wear pants to watch your favorite writers talk about your books. So obviously we're here to stay because nobody wants to put on the hard pants and actually go out there. We also are live on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitter. If you like what you see here, please give us a follow or a like, and please sign up for our newsletter, which is www.mightyblaze.com, so you never have literary FOMO ever again. No more FOMO. Nobody likes that. And now, without further ado, I'm again so happy to welcome Curtis. I'm going to read her bio in case you have been living under a rock for like the past 2 decades and don't know who she is. So, Curtis, you ready for your bio?
I am ready.
Okay, buckle up. It's you. I did not write this, by the way. If I did, it would be like more personalityful and funny, but I'm just stripping it right off your jacket. Curtis Sittenfeld's New York Times bestselling books have been translated into 30 languages and include the novels Prep, American Wife, Eligible, and Rodham. And the story collection You Think It, I'll Say It. Also, like, where is Sisterland? I have Sisterland.
Ha!
Right? I love Sisterland. Also, You'll Think It, I Say It. I love short stories. They're my favorite form. I love your short stories. They're so, so funny. Sittenfeld's stories have appeared in The New Yorker, The Atlantic, The Best American Short Stories, of which she was the 2020 guest editor. So good you had something to do during the pandemic. That's nice. She lives with her family in Minneapolis, Minnesota, representing. Hey, thank you for bringing us live from the Midwest. And today we are here to talk about a book that everybody is reading. Everybody, which is romantic comedy. Well done. You held up on cue. So great. I was just talking with our producer today, Kimberly Hensel Lawrence, about the fact that in the last day, 4 people have talked to her about romantic comedy. And I myself was at Buttonwood Books here in Massachusetts yesterday, and people were like scooping it up like it was gold and like carrying it out of the store. So we are so, so excited to have you here today. And I should also say that romantic comedy, like Curtis's other books, is a New York Times bestseller. It's a Reese pick, which I want to ask about because I have been like also stalking Reese for many years and need to know what this is like. And we're just seeing it everywhere. So if you have not yet bought several copies of this book, first of all, why? Second of all, Mother's Day is coming. You should buy at least 15 copies for your mom and all the other mothers you know in your life. It's just a great, such an enjoyable read. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so now tell us what romantic comedy is about in your own.
So it's about the main character is a woman in her late 30s named Sally, who is a writer at a late night sketch comedy show in New York that bears a strong resemblance to Saturday Night Live, but is called the Night Owls. And she writes a sketch making fun of the phenomenon, which is inspired by SNL. We can get into that or not get into that, but where talented, but fairly ordinary looking or like mortal seeming men from the show date and sometimes marry super famous, super successful, super gorgeous female celebrities. But it does not seem to happen that ordinary female writers date or marry super gorgeous, super famous male celebrities who are guests on the show. And then that week, there's a smoking hot pop singer named Noah Brewster, who's the guest host. And Sally, the protagonist, thinks she might have chemistry with him, but she's not sure. Is it all in her head? I don't know. I do know, but the reader is not supposed to totally know.
I think I knew, or at least you root for them like so much, right? So yeah, I love this a whole phenomenon of like quote dating up, right? And the idea that like if you're a sort of average guy, you can get a really hot girl, and if you're a average girl, you're just done for. Is kind of like the trope, right? So the romantic comedy is addressing that trope through Sally and through Noah. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that is fair to say. I mean, I can't say that I like thought in terms of like trope first and then characters to embody it. I thought like characters first, and then it was sort of in retrospect, I think I could see the tropes. But yeah, I definitely think it is supposed to examine that phenomenon.
This is one of the questions I wanted to ask you. I have many, many questions, just because I was so excited by so many elements about this book and about all of your writing. But the first thing I want to say is you're such a brave writer to me.
Uh,
Yeah, I write historical fiction. Everybody I write about is dead, or I wrote a memoir. It was about my dog who was also dead. So, like, there's not a lot of, sort of pushback there. But I think of you as being part sociologist, part politico, and then like all writer with a lot of humor that sort of levens out a lot of the other qualities. And I think about American Wife and about Rodham and like how brave those books are. I feel like romantic comedy is just as brave because it's set in this very SNL like workspace that I just thought, how does she know what the rhythm of this is like? It's very specific. So guys, if you love SNL, you're going to love reading this book. It's like watching it from behind the curtain instead of being in the audience, I think. And I just feel like it's so brave because it's such an institution, that show. Like it got me through the last elections. Like I remember watching it with my uncle when I was 4 in New York, staying up late. Like it was such a treat, like it's my jam. How did you attempt, like I'm just going to go chronologically here with the book. How did you attempt that idea or enter that workspace? And did you start with that?
It's so funny, by the way, because on the one hand, I feel like you're saying these like, lovely, generous things. And then also whenever someone says like, that's so brave, I sort of think that that's like code for like, I wouldn't have done what you did.
Oh,
Or
oh my
like,
God, no, I legit mean it. I know what you mean, because when people are like, your book's so ambitious, you're like, F you, because what that means is you've fallen short of the mark. It's like saying your apartment is garden level and you're like, yeah, it's a basement. We know, we can hear you. When I say brave, I mean you have cojones doing this big scope stuff, whereas I am like little scope stuff. Like I think the same thing about party scenes in books.
oh
And
yeah,
also about
yeah. No,
like
I
action scenes in
totally
books.
know what you mean. And so I have to say, I think when I write my books, I kind of come up with an idea, and there's like two things that I tell myself that allow me to like move forward. One is, I'm sitting writing in a room by myself for a pretty long time, like a minimum of a year. And I think like I can just try this. And if it doesn't turn out very well, I can make it disappear and no one will ever know it existed besides me. So it's not like having an idea obligates me to like share it with the world. But then the other thing is I feel like that I am kind of like a fan girl for some of the topics I write about. Like, I mean, I think that I'm like a Jane Austen fan girl, and wrote maybe should I say fan woman? I don't know if fan girls like derogatory, but like, I wrote Eligible, or I admire Hillary Clinton. I mean, again, it's not like I don't think someone would read like would feel like, oh, Rodham is like a pure ode to Hillary Clinton. Like it's more, it sort of grapples with her complexities. But I also think probably most people could guess it was written by a Democrat, which I am. So anyway, so I think I say to myself, like I know what my role is. Like I'm writing fiction about these topics and I'm kind of approaching them sideways. And I'm not, I don't have to be authoritative, or it's different. Like I actually, if it with the Hillary book, if you had said to me, you need to write an essay that has like lots of original thoughts about Hillary Clinton, I would have, I think, said like, that's impossible. There's no original thoughts left to be expressed by anyone about Hillary Clinton. And I felt like, so I make these little rules for myself, but then the world doesn't know what the rules were. So it's almost like I then, birth the book, and somebody else might be like, wait, why did you do that? Or how did you do that? And with romantic comedy, I totally understand that I am not, in fact, a comedy writer, but I think I can get characters through scenes. I think I can develop characters. I think I can write dialogue. And, I did a ton of research. So I think I'm kind of like humble about what I don't know and I'm willing to learn. And to do the research for romantic comedy was sort of its own joy. Like, it was listening to comedians interview each other on podcasts, reading memoirs by current and former SNL cast members. There's this oral history of SNL that's like just a delight. I'm looking at it on the shelf above my desk. It's called Live from New York. It's like 750 pages that, again, I only wish it were 1,500 pages. And there's a documentary called Saturday Night. Like, there's so much out there, and it was such a pleasure to kind of consume it. So I think I just feel like, I can learn a lot by reading, which is something I've known since I was a very young age, and then I can make use of it.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I was going to ask about your research, and I was hoping it involved a lot of popcorn, like watching SNL from its earliest incarnation, and maybe drinking like a grasshopper or like some sort of ice cream drink at the same time, and just sort of getting the patter down. Why this particular workplace? Like, I guess I should back up and say, you mentioned you start with ideas, but then you're also talking about developing character. And I don't know if writers like sort of have a constancy among books. I usually start with like some tiny hinge idea in a character's life and develop that. Some people do like, the characters walking around in their heads and won't leave them alone. For this, did you start with Sally? I imagine a Sally first book and then think, oh, I'm going to make her a writer, and then, oh, SNL? Or did you do SNL first and then have her grow out of that?
So sort of both, actually. So my family was watching a lot of SNL during the pandemic. And as a side note, Sally mentions she's the same age as the, fictional show, The Night Owls, and that they were both born in 1981. In real life, SNL and I were both born in 1975. So I've watched it off and on, my whole life since I was like 10. So my family was watching a lot starting. It wasn't really because of the pandemic. It was, I think that I introduced my children to it in December 2019, which I think were probably a little bit too young, which of course greatly enhances its appeal. And then when the pandemic kind of arrived, it was one of the forms of TV that we watched a lot as a family. And I would think to myself, someone should write a screenplay for a romantic comedy about a female writer at a show like this who writes a sketch making fun of the kind of dating up phenomenon. And then she should have chemistry, with a celebrity, a male celebrity of her own. And then a few months passed, and I thought, oh, maybe that screenplay should be a novel, and maybe someone who writes it should be me. So it was like it was sort of, almost like being one step ahead of myself or one step behind myself, and kind of, which I've done actually a lot of times. I've been like, someone should write a novel about blah, 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 or I've made a joke that someone should. And then I thought, or is that not a joke? So it was kind of like the setting and the character were always joined, and they were always in the origins of this particular book.
I love that. I actually have sort of downloaded books as like jokes almost. Like, there was an intermission in my novel workshop once where I was like, somebody should write historical romance, stealing the idea from the Notebook about blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, wouldn't that be hilarious? And people were like, actually, you should write that. And then I did actually write it as a podcast. But I think you have these ideas where you're like, that's just so silly, or that's just so charming, or that's just so whatever. And then 3 months later, it's still like, boop, boop, boop.
Yeah. I mean, I did that with my novel, American Wife, where I was sort of fascinated by Laura Bush, in spite of the fact that I myself am a Democrat. And I read a biography of her and wrote this essay where I said, like, her life is like a great novel. And then like maybe 2 years later, and I was like, oh, it's like a novel that I should write, and I shouldn't have used word the great because that's kind of awkward.
It's a great American novel now because I'm writing it. I'm going to go off the reservation. I had lots of questions about romantic comedy, which I will continue to ask. But I'm wondering, like, about this sort of nexus for you of the ideas and the timing of ideas and the arrival of ideas and your professional career. Like all of us who are career writers have editors and agents who are like, "Where's the next book? What's your next idea? Pitch us the next idea." And you're like, my muse does not respect deadlines. I respect deadlines, but the muse doesn't always arrive on time. When do you reveal an idea that's been kicking around to your team, like to your agent, to your editor?
That's a good question. So actually, the funny thing is that Rodham came out in May 2020. So it was published in this world that we hadn't really, anticipated. And I mean, it's a very strange thing where like my hobby and my profession are the same. I mean, I think that's very lucky on the whole. But it really was sort of illustrated to me during the pandemic where a few people said to me almost like, I can't believe that you can still write fiction during the pandemic. And I was like, oh my God, I'm like clinging to writing fiction because it's like this form of self-soothing or whatever. So during that summer, pretty quickly after Rodham had come out, I sent like a list of ideas to my agent and my editor, and both of them were like, Curtis, why don't you relax a little bit? Which the funny thing is I do sometimes like lightly miss deadlines, not like severely, but I was a little bit like, that's a risky thing, like to be like, just put your feet up for a few weeks or a few months. So they weren't in that case. I mean, I'm not on a book a year schedule. I'm on a book every 2 or 3 year schedule. But I also, I think that I have more ideas than I will ever write. So it's not coming up with ideas is not really the issue. It's sort of executing them, like choosing which one to focus on. And I do feel confusion. Like right now, I feel like I'm deciding between 2 ideas for my next novel. And it feels like a really huge decision. Like it kind of feels like, there's 2 apartments or 2 houses. And whichever one I move into, it's going to have very real positive or negative consequences on my daily life for a while. So I want to make the right choice, but of course I'll never really know. I mean, I might eventually write both of them, but I do think it's always like a little bit different, but it is like a big, complicated question. Like, how do you choose your next big project?
Oh yeah, it's like book bachelorette. Like you're getting down to the final like 2 or 3 candidates. Like they're all meaningful at that stage. Like all the other ones have been sent home.
Yeah,
so you
yeah,
start out with
yeah.
like 25 ideas. One of them shows up wearing a shark suit. Like one of them has a dildo. Whatever. And you're like, you can go. But then the other ones have substance. I see my producer's like grabbing her head right now. But like the other ones have substance, and then you think, okay, I'm on the same kind of schedule, except it's more like 5 years. But like if I choose a novel topic, it means I'm going to be living in that house, in that emotional and mental house for the next 5 years, especially because everything I write requires a jillion hours worth of research. And if I get tired of it halfway through, you're like, but I can't move out right now. Now the house is under contract, So it is a decision. How do you make that choice?
Well, it's funny because when I sent my editor and my agent this list of ideas in 2020, and they were kind of like, relax, but like, the funny thing is that a lot of those ideas have not only stayed with me, but I've kind of been, not even intentionally, but I've been refining them in my head. And I actually think some of them are better ideas now, where it was like I had a sort of broad idea, and now that 3 years have passed, I have a much clearer idea of like, this is how I would actually execute it. Although I may have done the thing where I, moved into an apartment and then moved out again. So I started writing a book. People would say to me when Rodham was published, people would say, what are you going to write next? And I would say, I want to write something short and fun. And I worked on another book for about 7 months, and then had the realization that it was not short and also not fun. And so I set it aside. And I think it's interest. And then that's when I turned to romantic comedy, where I felt this almost like desperation for something to be like very pleasurable and very manageable. And because so much of this book is like two characters, it wasn't, the plot wasn't super unwieldy. Like when it's actually really funny to hear you talk about this sort of daunting aspect of writing party scenes, where there are definitely a few scenes where there's quite a lot of characters, but that's not most of them. So it felt manageable. And it also, this book, I actually wrote romantic comedy more quickly than I think maybe any book I've previously written. Because of the pandemic, I traveled almost not at all during the year that I was writing it. I barely socialized. I barely left the house. So it felt like I felt very focused, but also the book always welcomed me in. Like there have been times when I have been writing novels, and I'll sometimes think maybe I'll just take a few weeks off and write a short story. And I never really felt tempted to do that. Like I always wanted to go back to the world of comedy and the world of flirting. I mean, why wouldn't I?
I know. Why would you? Yeah, it's such a luscious thing to do. It's almost like the short story sounds like it's a palate cleanser from the other books that are more demanding in some ways. Like you have a big, I love the house metaphor. Like you have a big architectural digest house. It's like a worthy project, but damn, that stuff's heavy lifting sometimes, right?
Yeah. Yeah. The problem though with it being a palate cleanser, it's like, you know, like let's say you're eating, I don't even know what, like some giant steak. It's like eating like sorbet in the middle and then going back and eating more steak. Like that novel hasn't gone away.
Totally. Yeah. I have like this thing where I just started working on something that's a different track for me, but I have like 3 giant historical novels lined, like teed up.
Oh,
And I
wow.
just think, because that's usually my lane. And
Yeah.
my agent is not watching this because she has no idea that I'm not working on those. But I feel like that's the steak buffet. And I'm like looking at this buffet and there are these big steaks. I'm like, I like you steaks, but I would rather go over here and have this, I don't know, like big block of cheese right now with some champignon and like whatever.
Yeah. That's totally what romantic comedy was for me, was,
Interesting.
you know, kind of like, it felt like light and fizzy and again sort of manageable and like it. And again, I think that I hadn't even thought of it as a novel. Like I had thought of it as like someone should write a screenplay. So it felt kind of like airy and enticing and all the things that sometimes a complicated novel doesn't feel.
Yeah, it's sort of Nora Ephron-y. I was watching a friend of mine present her book yesterday at the bookstore, Jane Roper, who is a Blazer. She wrote a book called Society of Shame about cancel culture, and it is side-splittingly funny. And she said, I'm from the Iowa Writers Workshop. You know, I've been writing serious stuff my whole life. There's like a Helen Fielding quality to that too, where you're like writing something like very serious your whole life, and then you're like, I'm just going to write something fun. And then the writing goes boom and like totally takes off and everybody loves it. Was this fun for you to write? Like, did you sit and kind of like snort laugh your way through it? I hope.
I don't know that I snort laughed, but it was fun. It definitely was fun. Like, and again, I just remember, because I live in Minnesota, like I would walk around listening to these podcasts. Thank you. On behalf of the entire state. Thank you. And it would be like, you know, like actually, as you probably know from having spent time here, it gets so cold that like essentially your iPad or your phone can shut down. If you're like playing with it outside, it can shut down pretty quickly. So it's almost like I would have to if I was going to go for a walk in the 1 degree, you know, weather, I would sort of choose my podcast in the house and then like leave put in my like, you know, AirPods and then leave the house. So I was listening to a lot of like, Mike Birbiglia's Working It Out podcast, where he interviews SNL cast members. Mark Maron's WTF, who he like for many years, he like wanted to interview Lorne Michaels and then he finally succeeded. And, you know, Conan O'Brien and there's this one very distinct memory I have of like walking around, listening to Mike Birbiglia interview Bill Hader, who of course had been on SNL, and Bill Hader was like giggling in this very high pitched, endearing way. And I'm like wearing like 8 layers of clothes and there's like snow. And I was like, thank God I chose this book, you know, like, oh, like, thank God I'm listening right now to this and not to, I mean, because again, I read fiction and I listen to nonfiction. So I will often be listening to very like heavy books about, sort of how we got to this cultural national moment. And it was more fun to listen to Bill Hader giggle than to listen to something about like, like the collapse of our democracy.
Right, go figure, climate change. Let's listen to stuff about climate change. I mean, we all should, of course, and do. But yeah, it's nice to take a little break sometimes and have something fizzy like champagne rom-com. I mean, do you think I have one more writer wonk question, and then I would love to talk more about the book so our audience can know more about it if they haven't already devoured it, quaffed it, like with their champagne. But do you think we as writers sometimes equate the fun books with like not being as worthy somehow, or as worthy?
Probably, although I do think that the stereotype of writers maybe being like more melancholy than the average person is an accurate stereotype. And so I think that writers, I don't think that it's like, literary snobbery that prevents people from writing about lighter topics. I think sometimes it's like you write about your preoccupations and you write about what kind of haunts you, and that stuff almost by definition is darker. I mean, again, not that everything's autobiographical, although the flip side of that is somebody could write about like the Civil War and it's very autobiographical, like it's so I think that I think that what you're saying is generally true, but I'm not sure that's the main deterrent for writing fun books.
Yeah, it's not like I'm sitting there contemplating my choices and thinking if I write something fun, I'm going to be, cast out of the industry or something, although it might be a sort of a difficult sell. Like people say to me, why don't you write something funny? Like you're funny. I'm like, I don't know how to do that. I need to express my dark night of the soul. Otherwise, how do I get it out of my system?
Yeah. I think there is some of that. I know actually it is interesting because I may have been influenced. In 2011, these two British editors approached me and said, we're doing this project, that we're calling the Austen Project, and people were commissioning modern retellings of Austen's 6 novels. And and do you want to rewrite Pride and Prejudice or not, or do your own version of Pride and Prejudice? And when they offered that to me, I kind of thought like, oh, how can I not? Or this is irresistible. But I also thought, oh my gosh, if I write my own version of Pride and Prejudice, I'll know that I'm writing toward a happy ending, and it will be, just like I'll use my brain in a different way. And I think with romantic comedy, I almost had this feeling of like, I can be my own British editors and I can offer this experience to myself. And yeah, that was sort of the way it worked.
That is fascinating. Yeah, because I don't think about writing toward the happy ending. I think about writing toward the ending that like expresses life.
Right. Well, I mean, I think that as writers, we all have like our kind of instincts that you don't even think of them as instincts. You just think of them as sort of like the logical way to write a book. And I think that, that like if you weirdly, you can kind of maybe like talking to someone else can challenge you or get you to like think in this different way, and you're still using your own brain, but maybe writing a book that you wouldn't have anticipated that you yourself would write in a few different ways.
Okay, so now I'm gonna like go back to the actual book and talk about the book, which I loved reading so much, and I do think it shares a lot with your other books because it does have a sort of a sociological, to me, commentary on like the sort of male female thing that you explore in The Night Owls with like the women dating up, so to speak, and also about women's roles, which I think is, and again, all of this in your books is not like your face as the reader is pressed up against these topics. Like they're a joy to read and they're all really pleasurable to read. And this one is like super funny. Like all your books I find funny, but like this one's super funny. the New York Times called romantic comedy sort of a love letter to rom-coms, or like a sort of exploration of the trope. And you said you came to like realize the trope in it later and like sort of playing with it. Do you agree? And like, do you love the rom-com as a movie form or like as a book form?
Yes, the short answer is definitely yes. So I mean, I started reading romances when I was in grade school, and then because I'm now 47, like I saw a lot of the kind of golden age of rom-com movies, like in, you know, the 90s and stuff in the theater, and I'm sure was very influenced by them, like Nora Ephron, and then the sort of like Notting Hill and you know, Four Weddings and a Funeral and all of those. So I definitely feel like all of that is in my bloodstream. And if there's a new movie, and you know, like if someone said, oh, there's such and such movie and it's pretty good and it's like set in space, I might be like, oh, that's kind of intriguing. And if someone said there's a new movie and it's a romantic comedy and it's like really great, I feel like I'd be like, okay, I'm gonna watch it, you know, tonight or tomorrow night or something. Yeah.
Totally. There's like a Netflix banner right now that's like this George Clooney, Julia Roberts, like in a, you know, as like estranged parents of a daughter getting married in Hawaii. And I'm like, yes, okay. You know, like, why do you love
I
them?
watched that on I think they're maybe in Fiji. It's Ticket to Paradise, and I watched it on a plane recently, and it does exactly what you want it to do. And they're really delightful, and it's fun too because, you know, they're much older than you think of typical rom-com stars being. You know, they're obviously, I think they're both in their 50s at this point, but I know, I mean, and they're incredibly beautiful to watch on screen and charming.
One of my favorite rom-coms, and we can talk more about this too, is Something's Gotta Give with Jack Nicholson and Diane Keaton. Although I have to say that's like mostly about the house. Like I love the house
Ha!
movie, and I just like to go there and visit that house. But why do you think it is, besides the fact that we were sort of spoon-fed these, like all of us of a certain age, you know, we're like in our decade, we're spoon-fed these, and so they're in our digestion, like they're in our bloodstream, they're in our DNA. Like, why is there another reason that we all might love a good rom-com?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably a few reasons. Like I think people might say, "Oh, I like you know, like I like the banter and I like the chemistry and I like the sexual tension and I like rooting for people." I mean, I think it's also like it can be a very richly emotional experience, including it can be kind of stressful. Like you can feel very, I mean, to sort of, it's sort of like this obviously vicarious experience of watching a romance unfold, but you can feel like nervous and hopeful and excited and insecure. And so you get to kind of have all these emotions, but like you think you're in relatively secure hands, or you think like it's not like watching a horror movie and having all those like where something's bad is going to happen. It's almost like having all this fun emotional turmoil that like ideally ends up in people, you know, making out like that's so it's just like it's kind of fun and rich but also like light, you know.
Yeah, because you have the reassurance of knowing at the end what's going to happen. It's not like a dinosaur comes on screen and eats the people, and you're like, "Oh my god, what happened?" You know, yeah.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
whole tension in the plot is how do these people get together when it seems like they will not possibly
Yes,
get
yes,
together.
yes, yes. So it's sort of the journey of how you get there is the question more than like the ending is the
Right.
question.
Right. Like, you know, the destination, but there's still like, there's something in us watching this is like, maybe they won't make it this time. You're like, yeah, they're actually going to make it, but you're still kind of chewing your fingernails. Like, I still do this. Can you do a good Hugh Grant impression, by the way? Like, I have to,
I
you
can't do any I'm like, no, it's funny because I will say doing all this research on SNL, I you know, I have so much respect for people who are talented in front of a camera, and like I can only perform the role of myself. I cannot perform the role of anyone. I cannot do any voices. I can't. Yeah, I could never be an actor or like a comedian.
Oh my God, no, I could not do that. Although I watched so many rom-coms, and I watched Four Weddings and a Funeral so obsessively that there were like several years, and I was just walking around saying like, God, I'm just terribly sorry. Bugger, 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 you know, like, and that like actually formed my impression of like the man I wanted to meet and marry when I was in my 20s. I was looking for Hugh Grant everywhere, saying, I'm just so terribly sorry that it's Wednesday. Like,
Did you ever find him?
did I find Hugh Grant? Sadly, no. But I mean, I think that's good because he was sleeping with prostitutes. So that would have not been the rom-com that I wanted.
Although
And
he's on very good terms with Elizabeth Hurley to this day. So, you know,
I do find
we
him really charming. I must like if Hugh Grant is watching right now and saying, you know, you're sort of like between leading ladies, like you can hit me up, you know. But yeah,
call me Hugh.
call me Hugh. I'll think about it. I'll consider it, you know. But yeah, I think like there is a sort of expectation that I had as somebody who's very permeable to the things that she reads and the things that she watches. Like when I was in high school, I watched all the John Hughes movies. So I was always, you know, expecting,
Same.
you know, wearing like my thrift store clothes and then waiting for Jake to show up outside with his Trans Am and be like, hey, I'm going to feed you a cake while we're sitting atop a glass top table. You know, I'm like, okay, where is he? And then it's like,
Okay, wait, I have a question for you. Do you think
yeah.
that, have you had, I mean, this is that you can say no comment, but do you feel like in your life, like in the, you know, time since those John Hughes movies, do you feel like you've had many romantic comedy-ish experiences in real life? Or do you think that these books and movies actually set us all up for disappointment? And I'm complicit.
That literally was going to be my question to you. That was going to be like my setup with the Hugh Grant / Jake against the Trans Am question. I think they certainly set up unrealistic expectations, certainly. And I will say, and I hope this guy's also not watching, that when I was a sophomore in college, I slept with my best friend, who was a guy, Paulie. I'm sorry. Again, my producer is like clutching her head in the background. But because I had just seen When Harry Met Sally, and I was like, obviously we are supposed to be together. He's my very best friend, like, right? And we had been best friends since we were in nursery school. We had played in the sandbox together. So I'm like, this is so like I could see, you know, the progression. And I was like, I obviously am Meg Ryan, clearly, you know. And then it all went terribly wrong, as it should. So I think I had to perhaps get out from beneath the ideas that the rom-com presented to me in order to be like, what is reality and what is a movie? But I think the rom-coms are the way we all want to end up, right? Like it's like there's difficulty and then there's love within the difficulty, and at the end you have your happy ending and the people go on to make a life, and it's never really that simple. Like, what about you?
I mean, I wonder this question, and I sort of wonder about my own complicity having written romantic comedy. Like, is this sort of a form of like social or like marital propaganda? And I don't know. I mean, I think that like, you know, two people can really like, I think that it sort of, you know, transfers to real life, or is not just in movies or in books, that two people can have a very intense connection or bring each other lots of happiness. I'm not sure, you know, I don't know if it's like that happens like a few times in a life, or that's like moments. Those are not years or decades.
Yeah.
I don't know. And it's also, I mean, I guess you also could say like, are there other things that are like in movies that we just acknowledge to be unrealistic, but somehow we think that the depiction of love should be realistic? You know what I mean? So it's kind of like apropos of the something's got to give, like it would be like, well, no one's kitchen really looks like that, or like maybe some super rich people or super you know, like celebrities who have, you know, people like taking care of their house or whatever, but that we sort of acknowledge the discrepancy between the movie version of things and the real version of things in most cases, but then expect romance to be its own category of like, if you could just find the right person, it will be movie-like continuously.
Yes, that is the danger, right? I know, and Something's Got to Give, my favorite passage in that movie is a montage of a writer who has been wronged, and then she
Oh
goes
yeah.
is crying. I mean, it's really actually very funny. And Diane Keaton is like crying and crying and crying and writing her like heartbreak into a play out with, miraculous alchemy that of course then is on Broadway and is like, right. And I remember sending this montage to a guy I was dating, and he is also a writer, and he was like, this is exactly what I do when I get my heart broken. I sit in my $3 billion house in the fucking Hamptons and be like, and then it becomes a bestseller and everybody's happy. And I was like, that doesn't happen to you. Like, I'm just really like, I'm very gullible. I think, I guess for me, the danger of the romantic comedy is that it does set you up for, if you have tension in your romantic relationship, it's a sign that you're on the right track to find that one.
Oh.
All of the romantic comedies have this tension. And I do like, this is way too much fun. So I should talk about the book a little bit, but the tension in romantic comedy that I think actually sort of both deepened it and elevated it above like the screen rom-coms that I love so much is that it has a psychological basis that gives it this gravitas, which is that Sally, the heroine of this, she's kind of like, as would befit a comedy writer, like she's like a prickly pear wrapped around a nougat center, but the nougat is like not sweetness per se, it's insecurity. Like she has like really kind of like low self-esteem and is sort of embittered about things. And you watch her and have that syndrome of like, girl, don't go into that room. Like, don't open that door, because of the insecurities propelling her to do things that then sabotage their relationship. And it was both totally, that did seem to me to be psychologically true and yet also hard to watch. So I'm wondering if you could talk about that choice a little bit. It's not like, Noah gets transplanted to England and then hooks up with some, movie star over there and she has a misunderstanding. Like, this is like real life-ish. So I wanted
I did feel like I wanted to write about essentially, well, I mean, it's hard to say, like, you want to strike the balance between being realistic and being entertaining, but like psychologically fairly realistic characters. And I think you're completely correct that the obstacles in the relationship are mostly Sally's self-sabotaging and Sally's insecurity. And I also think that that's realistic. Like, I think that, many adults, even adults who are kind of competent in areas of their life other than romance, are kind of romantically insecure or haunted by things that happened a long time ago, including like maybe the way they were raised, which is not, shouldn't, I mean, of course it does directly affect like your romantic interactions, but it's not all just like past romantic heartbreaks. So it just felt like, I mean, I think that that's the kind of thing that I always write about, that it just like, I am interested in the sort of psychology of people and the contradictions. And I mean, I often feel that like acting against our own best interest or using, somewhat bad judgment some of the time is like what makes us human, like it's like if we didn't do that, we would be robots. And that it's very endearing that people, and again, it's also like there would be no novels and we'd be robots if people didn't make bad choices, including bad choices that they know are bad choices as they make them.
Yeah, that's totally right. We would also be so annoying. Like, imagine how annoying we would all be if we made only good choices all the time. It would be like, I like Gandhi and Mother Teresa, but I don't think I would necessarily want to hang out with them or see a rom-com about them.
Yeah.
That would not be.
I'll leave you to write that one.
Thanks a lot, Curtis. No, I pushed that idea. No backseats. I give that to you. You can take that one. So, I wonder too, and I have been having like way too much fun with this, and I'm just looking at the clock and I'm horrified because I know we have audience questions and I have been monopolizing you, and I have a lightning round too that I wanted to do, but I wanted to ask just quickly, the structure of the novel is like this beautiful 3-act circus, right? And like all the novelists from my novel workshop were like, oh, this is so great, because I'm always like 3-act structure, 3-act structure, 3-act structure. And one of those is set during the pandemic, and I know you wrote this during the pandemic. And I wonder if, without spoilers, you could talk about whether Sally and Noah would have had the same course to their relationship if it hadn't been for the pandemic? And is the pandemic in some ways sort of a dubious gift?
Well, I mean, I think the pandemic that we've all experienced, I mean, I think none of us would choose it. Like none of us would, and obviously had, such was sort of like at a minimum, a very negative experience. I think for many people, like a traumatizing experience. But I think, to directly answer your question, I think that probably for the characters, they would not have gotten together if the pandemic hadn't happened, because it gave them both time to kind of step back from their lives and assess them. And I think, ever since meeting on the show, they had been kind of thinking about each other for 2 years, but they weren't really motivated to act on that until things got very quiet. They both were lonely. They both had more time on their hands. And that was because of the pandemic. Like Noah is, sort of secluded in his LA mansion, and Sally has gone from New York to Kansas City, where she grew up, and is staying with her stepfather and his beagle. So it's just like they're removed from their normal lives the way so many of us were.
Mm-hmm. I also have to say that in every rom-com that I really love, the side characters sometimes almost steal the show from the leads for me. And Sally's stepfather and his beagle are like definitely fall into that category. Like the relationship she has with her stepfather is so sweet and so heartwarming. But to return to this, I feel like they're so great. Then so you guys should buy the book just for that, because it'll make you go, oh my God. Even if you don't believe in love, you can still enjoy this relationship with Sally and her stepfather.
You can believe in beagles.
I mean, yes, you can believe in dogs if you can't believe in love. That is basically my life. So yes, even that is in this book. I think, okay, I have like so many more questions, but let's take some audience questions if my producer can pop some of them up, so I'm not completely monopolizing you. Just stop it. No, stop monopolizing. For both authors, who has been your hardest character to write and why? Ooh, I definitely hand that off to you, Curtis. Thank you, Anissa.
Who has been my hardest character to write and why? I mean, I think that I guess I'll sort of give like a non-answer answer to this. I did feel when I was writing romantic comedy, as you said, there's an email section, and I did kind of think about Sally's writing voice and Noah's writing voice, and like how they would sort of generally sound, where it was okay for them to overlap in the way they sound, because like maybe they have a similar sense of humor and that's part of what draws them together. Mm-hmm. And maybe, where they need to differ. And even like, this is getting very nitty gritty, but I was like, any two people who have like slightly different writing styles. So Noah, when he abbreviates LA, he puts L period A period, whereas Sally just says like LA with no period. So it's like, or like Noah uses ellipses a lot and Sally doesn't really use them, except at one point she's kind of imitating him. So it was like, I think that trying to make all characters themselves and not just like stand-ins for me, or especially in their dialogue, that I don't want them to just talk the way I talk. I think that's always challenging.
That's a great answer, and it's also a great act of ventriloquism.
Yeah, I mean, being a novelist is a total act of ventriloquism, right? Like,
yeah.
Wait, so okay, how do you answer this question?
Well, basically the same way. I'm like, oh, exactly the same. Next question. But I really think that characters who are the most like me are the ones I struggle the most with. The greatest gift of a character is somebody who is not like me at all, who walks into my head and kind of takes up residence there, and may be similar to somebody I know and love, or like epitomizes maybe a characteristic of somebody I know and love, like bravery or diffidence or something. But then really has their own sort of emotional atmosphere that kind of takes up room in my head, and who speaks differently, who has a different background. I love those people. And then in my books, there's also usually a me character, and those are the hardest to write because I'm trying to differentiate them more from myself. So then I graft things onto them to camouflage that it's more like me,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
giraffe wearing feathers or something. And like, those characters are just a total asset, I think. But, you know, if I do my job right, people can't see the me character.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
totally.
although I have to say, in the thing that I'm writing now, the character is like completely me, and I'm enjoying that like so greatly, and I'm not even trying to disguise it, which is so much easier. Again, it's great, and
Is
that's
it like auto fiction? Would you say you're writing auto fiction
in a
currently?
way, I'm actually working on a thriller at the moment. And so, but it's a thriller about a writer. And I've always wanted to write about writers. And like, you're writing about a writer in rom-com and romantic comedy too, which I think is like, is that liberating? Like, I think it's so great to write about writing because you're like, I don't even have to do research for
I know.
this.
It's funny because I think I have probably in my life thought to myself, like, I don't want to write about writers. Like it almost seems like
It's
lazy
like
or
a cheat.
something.
It's like I'm
Yeah,
cheating, right? Yeah,
yeah.
totally.
And I've now done it twice, like two. So when I wrote my Pride and Prejudice, which was eligible, the protagonist was a writer for a women's magazine. So it's like they're not fiction writers, but but they are writers and they're like full-time writers. And so it's like, I mean, I do think like many times in this life, like especially now that I'm 47, like there's many things I've done that I thought like, oh, I would never do that. You know, that's the least of it. But it's like, I think that I kind of feel like, well, there should be a reason that I make a character or writer. It shouldn't just be because I'm too lazy to figure out a different profession. But if there's a reason, it's okay.
Totally. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think I gave myself permission after reading Jean Hemp Corlitt's amazing book, The Plot,
Oh,
which I loved not because it was a thriller, but because she writes so beautifully about writing. And I thought, oh, if she can do this, and she was literary fiction and switched tracks into writing a thriller, I was like, oh, I can as writer also. And it just seems fun. It's such a, and I love to read books about writers
yeah,
also.
yeah. I know. I mean, I do too. I do too. By the way, that's I haven't read The Plot, but it's on my list.
You will love. It is funny. So it is a
Yeah,
book about a writer.
she's a
It's
very
funny.
funny writer. Yeah.
Yes, which is also, this book is about a writer and it's funny. So I think you should buy it and read it, y'all people. Okay, do we have time for one more question before my lightning round? What do you think, Lily? I have finished romantic comedy. What should I read next? What are you reading and loving? Great question.
Is that for both of us or just for me?
That's for you. I'm going to make you do all the work. You're the guest.
Well, so I'm actually reading two books right now. I'm reading, which I'm very late to this, but Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin is, you know, just as wonderful as everyone on earth has told me that it is. Like so smart and like expansive and outstanding character development. And then I'm also reading a really delightful first novel called Late Bloomers by, I hope I'm pronouncing her name. It's Deepa Veradarajan. Is that right? Is that how you pronounce her name? Sorry, I should have like written this down beforehand. But it's basically a couple. I think they're in their 50s, have had an arranged marriage for more than 30 years. The woman initiates a divorce, and it's kind of about their lives after the divorce and their adult children's messy romantic lives as well. So it's like a multi-family, and the family, the son lives in New York, but the rest of the family lives in Texas. And yeah, it's like very interesting and kind of the right amount of like warm and messy and charming. And yeah.
How do you find your books? How do you find what you read for pleasure?
I mean, all different ways. Like, I think that the thing that, I mean, I read book reviews. Like, I read the New York Times book review. I read reviews that I see online. I see mentions of books on Twitter or, you know, Facebook or whatever. I mean, certainly if my writer friends, like sometimes my writer friends will even like literally like put a book into my hands, and that carries a lot of weight. Although I don't always end up loving the book. Like I have a friend who I really trust her taste overall, but then there's some overlap that we don't have. And so occasionally she's been like, this is so fun. And I'm like, is it? Is it so fun?
Is it though?
No, I think in that case I can say like, I'm glad this was so fun for you.
Yeah,
But
no,
yeah, I find, I mean, I think that I'm always curious what people are, I mean, and as with having more ideas than I'll ever write about, I think I already in my house have more books than I'll ever read. And, you know, I have like I'm not the fastest or slowest reader, but I, you know, always have like many books kind of lined up.
Same. I have like that book. I don't know if you have this stack. I'm still trying to think of a clever name for this, but it's the stack of books that you buy because you really genuinely want to read them. And then you get caught reading other things and you never read them. And then after a certain point, they like expire. And
Yeah.
there's like the expired TBR or something. And you're like,
Yeah.
I really actually am plugged into the topic. I really want to read it. I love this writer, whatever.
Yeah.
But I can't because it's in that stack.
You're right. You're right. That is a strange phenomenon.
Yeah, there's like I have that stack, like, but obviously you're not in that stack. And there are also
Ha!
to that stack, there are always like writers who I love, whose books I buy because that writer is coming out with a new book, and I'm like a fan woman lurking. And you are one of those writers for me. I'm like, there's a new Curtis book out. I'm not just saying that because you're actually on the show. I'm saying that because like that happens to be true. But do you have a writer like that whose books you eagerly anticipate?
I mean, my lifelong favorite writer is Alice Munro, who, you know, I think is essentially retired. But I'm trying to think if there's who. I mean, there definitely are people, but I'm, of course, whenever I get Mona Simpson, who has a new book, is like I always feel very conscious of like, oh, there's a new Mona Simpson. I think she's just like a really fantastic, complex writer, and I've loved so many of her books.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds really good. Okay, we have to close. Like I kept you for an hour, but I can just
That's okay.
have more like whiskey and conversation. So I'm actually not drinking whiskey. I'm drinking coffee, or am I? Okay, so I have a lightning round now, which is an idea I stole from my friend Edwin Hill, who's a thriller author who just interviewed me, and it was so much fun. I'm like, I'm taking that and do the lightning round. Okay, so you ready for the lightning round questions? Okay.
I hope so.
I don't know. It's gonna be hard. It's gonna be tough. So like, take some deep breaths. Favorite movie rom-com?
When Harry Met Sally, I think.
Ding ding. Good answer. Good answer. Favorite book rom-com?
I'm gonna go with The Idea of You by Robin Lee, which is like a sort of recent favorite, but it's do you know this one? It's basically like a divorced 40-year-old but glamorous art gallery owner mom in LA essentially ends up dating like a boy band heartthrob who's 20, who's very Harry Styles-ish, and it's great.
Oh, totally reading that. Thank you. That gives me hope for life. Okay, Nora Ephron, thumbs up, thumbs down.
Oh, like
I can't even believe I can show my neck in public. I love her so much. Like once I feel bad about my neck, it's like one of my favorite. When Harry Met Sally, Heartburn, all the things. Okay, when you're watching a rom-com, popcorn or Haagen-Dazs?
Popcorn. Okay, I mean,
cool.
I like ice cream and I like popcorn, but yeah, while watching a movie, popcorn.
Yeah, and maybe not together. Would be
maybe not. I mean, it would be. I wouldn't object if they both jumped into my lap, but I think I wouldn't mix them.
Mixing bad. Okay, and then for a broken heart, Haagen-Dazs or whiskey?
Haagen-Dazs.
Okay. So, and you answered this one already. When Harry Met Sally or Four Weddings and a Funeral?
I'm going to say When Harry Met Sally, but I think a strong case could be made for either one.
Yeah, that's a tough one, right?
That is a tough one.
It is. Okay, Meg Ryan or Sandra Bullock?
Both.
I always cheat in the lightning round and just say yes.
Oh yeah, yeah, exactly. To quote you, yes.
Yes. I know, I love both of them. Okay, Hugh Grant or Colin Farrell?
Colin Farrell or Colin Firth?
Oh, sorry, Colin Firth, not Colin Farrell. Maybe it is whiskey in that cup.
Both. But I would say either Colin Firth or Hugh Grant over Colin Farrell, even though I think Colin Farrell seems like a lovely person, but I would say Hugh Grant and Colin Firth are tied for first.
Okay, you just threw Colin Farrell under the bus, but that's okay because he wasn't supposed to be in this round in the first place and just snuck in. Okay, so Tina Fey or Amy Schumer?
Both.
I have noticed a trend here that you are like very egalitarian when it comes to the people, and then when it comes to like the art form questions.
I think that's true. I think that's true.
Yeah, because they do different things, right?
There's a place for all of us.
There's a place for all of us. It's so great. And then believe in happy endings, IRL, yes or no?
I mean, sure. Why not? Why not? How about I'm gonna go like this? I'm gonna go like, or wait, no, I know. Like, wait, God, I'm so bad. I'm not barely use it.
It's hard that way.
Like this. Yeah, yes-ish, mostly. Sort of.
Sort of, yes. This is why we need books and movies, because we know we're going to get the happy ending that we all want, which is just like, what is in? I'm not even going to say this could have a terrible end. They could both get run over by a bus. You don't know.
No, they couldn't.
But then it would not be true to the trope. So, okay. This is the happy ending of this interview. I have loved this so, so much. Thank you for coming on to talk about love with me and movies and rom-coms and writing, which is like my favorite thing to talk about. It's such a delight. Thank you, Curtis, for
thank you, Jenna. This was super fun. Thank you.
Super fun. So much fun. And guys, don't forget, buy all the romantic comedies. All of them for everybody you know, including yourself. And do not put them in the expired TBR stack either. Like, read it right away. It's hot. Hot, luscious stuff. Okay. Bye, everybody. Thank you so much for watching The Blaze. We will see you next time.